They say love can bridge the gap between two very different worlds. But I've come to learn that sometimes love alone isn't enough to protect you from what those worlds can throw at you. My name is Emma Chamberlain. I'm 24 years old, and for the past 2 years, I've been working at Johnson Enterprises as a secretary to the CEO. But this isn't just some ordinary job. You see, the CEO is Ronald Johnson, a man I met back in college, long before he ever held that title. I was a junior, studying business on scholarship, and Ronald, though already a graduate, had returned to college to deepen his knowledge in entrepreneurship. We ended up seated next to each other in a business management class. I never imagined someone like him would take notice of someone like me, quiet, focused, just trying to survive college and help my mom. But he did. We got paired up for a group project, and over time we started talking more, not just about class or case studies, but about life, struggles, dreams. He was 6 years older than me, already so mature and composed. I always felt safe around him. He was kind, really kind. Never once looked down on me, even after learning I grew up in a single-parent household. My dad? Gone. He gambled everything away and walked out when I was still in elementary school. My mom worked multiple jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. We had nothing, no luxury, no safety net, just each other, and the hope that maybe one day I could break the cycle. Ronald admired that about me. He once told me I had more determination than most of the rich kids he'd grown up with. After graduation, when he was offered the role of president of Johnson Trading, a branch under the massive Johnson Group empire led by his father, he asked me to come work with him. I thought he was joking. Me? Working in a place like that? But he meant it. He gave me the opportunity, and I grabbed it with both hands. I studied hard, got my certifications, and made sure I earned every bit of respect on my own. 2 years passed, and in that time, something more than friendship grew between us. We fell in love, a quiet, slow, soul-deep kind of love. We dated for a year and eventually got married. It felt like a dream, marrying the man who believed in me when no one else did. At work, Ronald never flaunted our relationship. He treated me as a professional, and I admired how he balanced leadership with humility. At home, he was thoughtful and gentle. I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. But that perfect world started to shift the day a new name appeared in the company's executive update. A transfer notice had been sent out, the appointment of a new vice president. When I saw the name, my stomach dropped. Julia Johnson. The name alone made my skin crawl. She was Ronald's sister-in-law, married to his younger brother, Billy Johnson. I had only met her once before at our wedding reception, but that one encounter had left a sour taste I couldn't shake off. She was breathtakingly beautiful and well-dressed, but the moment I approached her to introduce myself, she looked me up and down and let out a half-hearted, I remember standing there, awkwardly holding my champagne glass, trying to smile through it. I asked her where she was from. Just small talk. She scoffed and said, "Cincinnati." Then came the kicker. "I meant your social class, not geography. You're not just some ordinary girl, are you?" That moment made me freeze. I didn't even know how to respond. I muttered, "I guess I'm just an ordinary person." And she turned away, uninterested. I hadn't seen her again after that, until now. Julia wasn't just joining the company. She was coming in as vice president, my superior. Apparently, she had an impressive record of turning struggling companies around, and Johnson Trading had been underperforming lately due to the recent economic downturn. Food and clothing, our core sectors, had taken a hit, and despite Ronald's best efforts, the numbers didn't look good. So the Johnson family made a decision: bring in Julia, the so-called fixer. On the day she was scheduled to arrive, Ronald and I went together to pick her up from the station. I was nervous, more than I wanted to admit. When she stepped into the limousine, she barely acknowledged me. At the office, we entered the president's suite together, and Ronald turned to me with a strange expression. "Emma," he said, "Julia requested you as her secretary." My mouth dropped open. "Why me?" "I tried to suggest someone else," he explained, "but she insisted. I think she wants someone familiar, someone she can trust." But that didn't make sense. Trust? Julia didn't even like me. I didn't want to argue with Ronald. I didn't want to make waves, so I nodded and accepted. The next day, I officially started working under her. The duties were similar: scheduling, taking calls, assisting with reports. But the tone? It was different, so cold. I greeted her politely on my first day, hoping we could start fresh. "I'm so glad you're here, Julia. I look forward to working together." She looked up from her desk and replied flatly, "I don't care about that. Just give me tomorrow's schedule." I bit the inside of my cheek. I wanted to respond, to say something, anything, but I swallowed the bitterness and did my job. I went home that evening with a splitting headache. Ronald noticed. "You okay?" he asked as soon as he saw me. "I'm fine," I lied. I didn't want to worry him. But things only got worse. One day I made a serious mistake. I accidentally swapped Ronald and Julia's schedules. Julia ended up showing up to a client meeting meant for Ronald, a big one. A $100,000 deal was on the line. Julia stormed back into the office furious. "Do you even understand what your mistake cost us?" she shouted. I was humiliated. I had to sit through disgusting comments from that perverted old executive and still walked away with nothing. We lost the deal. $200,000 gone. I was stunned, horrified. I bowed my head and apologized again and again. Ronald tried to intervene. "Julia, mistakes happen. We'll recover." But Julia wouldn't let it go. "She'll do it again. People like her always do. This is why commoners have no place here." That word, commoners, cut through me like a knife. She wasn't just criticizing my mistake. She was attacking who I was, how I grew up. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't say a word. I just stood there and took it. For Ronald's sake. Later, I ran into her again in the company cafe. I approached her, determined to apologize once more. "I'm really sorry, Julia. It was an honest mistake." She sipped her coffee, not even looking at me. "I'm forgiving you this time because Ronald asked me to. But don't forget, I can fire a commoner like you any time." That was the final straw. "I get it," I said. "I made a mistake, but my background has nothing to do with it." She blinked. "Excuse me? You keep calling me a commoner like that explains everything. My upbringing doesn't define my worth." She narrowed her eyes and said nothing, just turned and walked away. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. After that uncomfortable exchange in the cafe, I told myself I'd be smarter, colder, more cautious. I didn't want to give Julia another reason to humiliate me, or worse, find an excuse to get me fired. But that resolve didn't last long. 1 week later, Ronald, Julia, and I were scheduled to attend an important executive meeting at the Johnson Group's head office. It was a big deal, the kind of meeting where reputations are made, or broken. Julia had already made it clear that I'd better not embarrass her again. That morning I arrived early and triple-checked everything. The documents, the slides, the handouts, even the order of presentations. Ronald and I had gone over everything the night before. I couldn't afford another slip-up, not again. The meeting was set for 3 p.m., and before that, we had a pre-meeting lunch at a high-end restaurant near the building. Ronald ordered something light, as he usually did before presentations. I was a little nervous, so I mostly sipped on my water, letting the cold liquid calm me. That's when I noticed it, a strange taste. Salty, sharp, like something that wasn't supposed to be there. I glanced at the glass but said nothing. Maybe it was just my nerves, I thought. Maybe the water had been filtered weird, or my senses were overreacting. I finished the glass anyway. I needed hydration. At 3 p.m., we walked into the boardroom. My heart thudded in my chest, but I smiled through it. The meeting started smoothly. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was going to be a turning point. Then the cramps hit. It started as a gentle churn in my lower stomach. Nothing major. I ignored it. But within minutes, it became something else entirely. A hot, twisting agony that nearly doubled me over in my seat. Sweat prickled on my forehead. My hands shook. I couldn't focus on anything anyone was saying. All I could hear was the roaring sound of my own pulse and the rumbling protest from deep inside my gut. I tried to tough it out. Just hold on a little longer, I thought. But the pressure was too much. I clutched my stomach and whispered, "Excuse me," then practically sprinted out of the room. What followed was 30 minutes of humiliation. I won't even sugarcoat it. I was sick, violently, painfully. I could barely stand by the end of it, and when I finally returned to the corridor outside the meeting room, the boardroom was empty. I staggered to the company cafe, pale and drenched in cold sweat. My legs wobbled beneath me as I collapsed into a chair. Ronald was already there, chatting with Julia, or rather trying to. He looked worried the second he saw me. "Emma, are you okay?" he asked, rising to come to my side. Julia didn't move. She just smirked and sipped her espresso. "Maybe she ate something bad," she said casually. "Or drank something bad. That's when it hit me. The water, the taste, the timing. I stared at Julia, and something twisted inside me. I didn't want to believe it. It was unthinkable. But deep down, I knew. I just knew. Still, I said nothing. Not yet. I couldn't. Not until I was sure. Ronald told me to go home and rest. I nodded weakly, but before leaving, I remembered I still had to drop off Julia's schedule for the next day. Like a robot, I walked to her office and knocked. "Come in," she said. I stepped in, trying to compose myself. She glanced up. "Oh, it's you. What now?" "I just wanted to deliver your schedule," I said, placing the file on her desk. "Also," I paused. "What?" she asked sharply. I stared straight at her. "You put something in the water, didn't you?" Her expression didn't even flinch. Instead, she leaned back and let out a soft, mocking laugh. "What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. At lunch, when Ronald and I left the table, you were alone. I tasted it. It wasn't just water." "Wow," she said, feigning shock. "That's quite an accusation. Got any proof?" I didn't, not yet. But then my eyes drifted across her desk, and there it was. A small white box. Laxatives. She noticed my gaze and didn't even try to hide it. "Well," she said casually, "I might as well admit it. Yes, I added something." My breath caught in my throat. "Why? Why would you do that to me?" Her voice turned icy. "Because you don't belong here. You never have. You're a commoner. Trash. And I'm sick of pretending otherwise." I stood there frozen, my hands clenched into fists. "You could have gotten me seriously hurt." She shrugged. "But you didn't. So count yourself lucky, and don't think for a second you can tell Ronald. Even if you do, who'll believe you? You have no evidence. And if you try to push this, you'll be making an enemy of the Johnson family. That includes Ronald's little brother. Think carefully. You want to be the reason their brotherhood falls apart?" I was speechless. Tears welled up in my eyes as she added, "Now get out, before I change my mind and fire you anyway." I left in a daze. I felt like my entire world was spinning out of control. How had it come to this? When I got home that night, Ronald was waiting. He saw my swollen eyes, the way I trembled as I tried to hang up my coat. "Emma," he said gently, "what happened? Was it Julia?" That was all it took. I broke down. I told him everything, from the wedding day encounter to the humiliation at work, to the water, the laxatives, the threats, everything. Once I started, I couldn't stop. Ronald sat silently for a long time. Then he held me. "I should have known," he whispered. "I knew she was difficult, but I didn't think she'd go this far." I shook my head. "This is going to tear your family apart." "I don't care," he said. "You're my wife, my family. I should have protected you better." I wanted to believe him, but things weren't so simple. A week later, we were invited to a Johnson family dinner. The entire family, including Julia and Billy. I didn't want to go. I was terrified, but Ronald insisted. "They need to hear the truth," he told me. The restaurant was luxurious, candlelit, quiet. My in-laws were already seated when we arrived. Julia was there, sitting beside Billy, looking smug as ever. When I greeted everyone politely, she rolled her eyes. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sitting down with this, she pollutes the air." Billy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then Julia turned to Ronald's father and said, "You've heard about her screw-up, haven't you? How can we let someone like her stain the Johnson name?" That's when Ronald's father, the chairman himself, raised his hand. "Enough," he said, voice sharp. Julia blinked. "What do you mean?" "You want someone to leave this table?" he asked. She smirked. "Exactly." "Then you should go." The room fell silent. "What?" Julia stammered. "You can't be serious." "I am. You're the problem, not Emma." Billy stood up. "Actually, I've been thinking about it too. I want a divorce." Julia turned to him, eyes wide. "You what?" "I'm tired, Julia," he said, "of the arrogance, the control, the manipulation. You're brilliant at business, but you treat people like dirt." Ronald's father nodded. "We've tolerated this long enough. We heard everything, including what you did to Emma." Julia looked around, realizing everyone was against her. She tried to recover. "You have no proof," she spat. "This is all baseless." I smiled quietly, then reached into my pocket, pulled out a pen. Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to be?" I clicked a hidden switch, and her voice filled the room. "Yes, I mixed a drug into your glass." Silence, then gasps. Julia's face drained of color. "This pen is a recorder," I explained. "I use it for note-taking at meetings. But that day, I just had a feeling." Julia stood up, trembling. "You tricked me!" "No," I replied calmly. "You exposed yourself." And then Ronald stood up and pulled out his phone. "One more thing." He played a second recording. Julia's voice again, this time bragging about using Billy and the Johnson name to eventually merge with her father's company, the Lee Group. This poor woman is unnecessary. I'll absorb the Johnsons into the Lee Group soon enough. Everyone's face turned pale. Julia collapsed back into her chair. Billy looked crushed. His mother looked like she'd been slapped. Ronald's father stood. "You're finished, Julia. Divorced, fired, and cut off. Leave now." Julia tried to protest, but no one would listen. As she stormed out, she hissed, "The Lee Group will never forgive you." But no one cared. Not anymore. I had finally been heard and believed. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. The restaurant emptied slowly after Julia stormed out, her designer heels clacking against the marble floor like the final notes of a bitter song. I sat there stunned, tears brimming in my eyes, not from sadness, but from a rush of relief so intense it almost overwhelmed me. I hadn't planned any of it. I wasn't trying to be clever or calculated. I just wanted to protect myself. That little pen recorder was something I'd carried out of habit, more for work meetings than anything else. But it turned out to be my lifeline. As I wiped my cheeks, I felt a warm hand on my back. It was Ronald's mother. "You did nothing wrong, Emma," she said softly. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." Her voice cracked slightly. It was the first time I had seen her like this. She'd always been reserved, elegant in that graceful mother-in-law way. But tonight, she looked at me like a woman who had finally seen something she'd been missing all along. "I was raised by a single mother, too," she said. "We didn't have much. Julia's words tonight, they weren't just cruel, they were ignorant." I couldn't help it. The tears spilled over. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I didn't know if I could ever be accepted by this family." Ronald slid his hand into mine and squeezed. "You're not just accepted. You're family. And you're staying." That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing, mind spinning. It was a deep, dreamless sleep, like my soul had been given permission to rest. 2 weeks passed quietly after that. Julia was officially removed as vice president, and the divorce proceedings between her and Billy began immediately. Billy had taken it hard, not because he still loved her, but because he felt duped. "She never loved me," he confided to Ronald one night. "She just wanted access, influence, a stepping stone." Still, he was healing too, in his own way. And for the first time, I saw the Johnson family start to breathe again. There was less tension in the office, fewer hushed conversations behind closed doors. Even the employees seemed lighter. One afternoon, Ronald's father called me into his office. I was a little nervous, despite everything that had happened. He stood when I entered, an old-fashioned gentleman to the end. "Emma," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "I want to thank you for your courage, and I want to apologize." "You don't have to," I started, but he raised a hand. "Yes, I do. I should have stepped in earlier. I saw signs, but I brushed them aside. Because Julia was family, because I thought maybe I was imagining it. But you stood up for yourself, and for all of us. That took guts." I nodded quietly, not trusting myself to speak. "I'd also like you to take on a new role," he continued. "Not as a secretary, but as a senior executive assistant, someone who helps oversee internal operations and employee welfare. You've got insight and empathy. Both are rare." I blinked. "Are you serious?" "Very," Ronald agrees. That night, when I got home, I burst through the door, grinning from ear to ear. Ronald looked up from the kitchen with raised eyebrows. "What happened?" "They offered me a promotion." He rushed over and picked me up, spinning me in a circle. "I knew it. You deserve it." We celebrated with takeout and laughter and silly dancing in the living room. No champagne, no fancy clothes, just the two of us, barefoot and happy. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. About a week later, the phone rang. I was in the office organizing staff evaluations when our assistant buzzed me. "There's a call for you from the Lee Group." I froze. Julia's threat came flooding back to me. "The Lee Group will never forgive you." "Put it through," I said, my voice steady, even though my palms were sweating. The voice on the other end was older, male, polite. "This is Chairman Lee," he said, Julia's father. My heart stopped. Hello, sir. I'd like to speak with you if that's all right. I won't take much of your time." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I want to apologize for my daughter's behavior," he said. "What she did was inexcusable. When the Johnson family informed me, I was shocked. I confronted her and she admitted everything. I stayed quiet. I didn't know what to say. Julia has always been difficult, he continued. But this, drugging someone, humiliating you, that crossed every line. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. Because the Lee Group will not retaliate. Despite what she said, she doesn't speak for us. There will be no vendetta, no corporate warfare. I've made that very clear to her. I exhaled, the weight of tension easing from my shoulders. Thank you, I said quietly. That means a lot. She's been cut off, he added. I told her to get a job, learn humility. She needs to understand people before she leads them. I didn't know what Julia would do with that, but I hoped, for her sake, that she'd change. Even if just a little. Weeks passed, then months. Life slowly began to normalize. I focused on my new role, and Ronald and I found our rhythm again. We laughed more, took walks in the park, cooked together, dreamed about the future. And then one evening, an invitation arrived at our door. A dinner with my in-laws at the same restaurant. I hesitated. Do you want to go? Ronald asked gently. I thought about it. About the last time. About everything that had changed. Yes, I said, I think I do. The restaurant hadn't changed. Same soft lighting, same linen tablecloths, but the air felt lighter this time, happier. Ronald's parents were already seated when we arrived. They both smiled warmly at me. Emma, his mother said, you look radiant. Thank you, I said, taking her compliment to heart. We chatted about work, about vacation plans, about Billy's decision to take a break from the company and travel for a while. Then the waiter approached to take our order. That's when I saw her, Julia, dressed in the restaurant's staff uniform, hair pulled into a tight bun, carrying a notepad and trying to hide behind a polite smile. Our eyes met, and for a second I thought she might turn and run, but she didn't. She walked up to our table and said, voice low, "Welcome, may I take your order?" None of us said a word. She looked straight at me, and for the first time, there was no sneer, no superiority, just a quiet, tired woman who had been knocked down a few pegs by life. My father made me get this job, she said I needed to learn the basics. I guess he was right. Ronald's mother leaned forward. Julia, we don't want to embarrass you. I already embarrassed myself, she replied, eyes glancing away. You were right. All of you. I let my pride rot everything good inside me. I felt something shift in my chest. Not sympathy exactly, but maybe the beginnings of forgiveness. You were cruel, I said softly. You hurt me, deeply. I know, she whispered. But I also believe people can change. Julia's eyes welled up. She gave a small, stiff nod and retreated to the kitchen. The rest of the evening passed peacefully, and even though we didn't see Julia again that night, something about her presence lingered. Maybe it was closure. Or maybe it was hope, that even the worst chapters could still be rewritten. A few weeks after that unexpected dinner encounter with Julia, I found myself thinking about her more than I expected. Not in the same way as before, not with resentment or fear, but with a quiet curiosity. What happens to people after the storm passes? Do they drift, broken, or do they rebuild, slowly and silently? Ronald noticed my quiet reflection one night as we sat on our tiny balcony, legs tangled under a shared blanket, sipping warm tea. You okay? He asked, his voice gentle, familiar. Yeah, I said, resting my head on his shoulder. Just wondering if Julia's really changing. He didn't scoff or roll his eyes. He just wrapped an arm around me. I think hitting rock bottom forces people to face themselves, he said. Some get bitter, some get better. I nodded, unsure which direction Julia was heading in, but secretly hoping it was the second one. Spring rolled in gently, with longer days and blossoms on the trees lining the street outside our apartment. At work, I was thriving in my new role. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just keeping up. I was making a difference. I started holding regular check-ins with staff from different departments, helping bridge communication gaps, flagging concerns early, and making sure everyone felt heard. My inbox overflowed with thank you messages. People actually came to me with ideas, real creative ideas, and I passed them on to Ronald and the leadership team. He would often glance at me during meetings with a smirk and mouth, "Look at you," across the table. I'd bite my lip to hide my smile. It was the kind of quiet success I had always dreamed of. Not flashy, not headline-worthy, but meaningful, earned. One afternoon, after leading a workshop on employee wellness, I returned to my desk and found a small envelope with my name handwritten on the front. The handwriting was elegant but hesitant. My heart paused for a beat. I opened it. Inside was a short note. Emma, I know an apology may never be enough, but I wanted to say it anyway. Thank you for not destroying me when you had the chance. I was wrong about everything. I hope to be someone better someday. Julia. I stared at the note for a long time. Not angry, not emotional, just moved. Maybe that was all I needed. Not revenge, not justice, just acknowledgement. I placed the note in the drawer beside my desk and went back to work, feeling a strange kind of peace settle in my chest. A few months later, we held a company-wide event to celebrate the fiscal year's close. There was food, music, laughter. Ronald gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their hard work and resilience during tough times. Then, to my surprise, he handed me the mic. I stood up there, heart racing, facing hundreds of employees. People who used to barely know my name, let alone care about my story. I took a deep breath. Hi, everyone, I began. I just want to say something really simple. Thank you, not just for showing up today, but for showing up every day. For each other, for yourselves, for this company. I know how hard this year has been. I know what it's like to feel invisible or not good enough, but I also know what it feels like to be seen. And I hope, in some small way, you've all felt that here, because you deserve to. There was a beat of silence, then applause, real, warm applause. After the event, Ronald pulled me into a side hallway and kissed my forehead. Have I told you lately that I love you? He asked. I smiled. You just did. It wasn't long after that celebration when something unexpected happened. One Saturday morning, Ronald and I were at the farmer's market, juggling fresh fruit and overpriced pastries, when a voice behind us called, Emma? I turned around. It was Julia. No makeup, hair in a ponytail, jeans and a plain sweatshirt. She was holding a paper grocery bag with both hands like it was a shield. I didn't expect to see you here, she said, shifting awkwardly on her feet. Same, I said cautiously. She looked at Ronald, who nodded politely. Then she turned her gaze back to me. I've been working at a nonprofit, she said, helping at-risk youth, admin stuff, low pay, long hours, but it feels real. I didn't respond right away. I studied her face. She looked tired, yes, but lighter somehow, softer around the edges. That's good to hear, I said, and I meant it. She exhaled, like she'd been holding that breath for a long time. Anyway, I just wanted to say, I admire you. I used to hate that you were strong. I thought it made me look weak, but now I know. It just means you knew who you were. And I didn't. I didn't say anything profound back. I didn't offer her forgiveness or throw salt on old wounds. I just nodded. And in that nod, something unspoken passed between us. Life continued. Billy returned from his travels, sun-kissed and more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. He announced that he wanted to start his own small business, a sustainability brand, and Ronald supported him wholeheartedly. Ronald and I moved into a slightly larger apartment with a second bedroom, not because we needed it, but because we dreamed of someday filling it, maybe with a child, maybe with music or books or art, maybe just more of us. One lazy Sunday afternoon, we were sitting on the couch, our feet tangled, watching a documentary and half arguing about dinner, when Ronald turned to me. Do you ever miss the old days? He asked. I looked at him. The days when I was just your secretary and you were the young CEO trying to prove himself? He laughed. Yeah, those days. I smiled. Sometimes, but I wouldn't trade this for anything. He leaned in and kissed me, slow and deliberate. Me neither. A year after Julia's downfall, we held another Johnson family dinner. But this one was different. No tension, no secrets, just warmth. Billy brought his new girlfriend. Kind, funny, down to earth. Ronald's mother baked homemade pie. His father talked about semi-retirement and maybe starting a mentorship program. And me? I sat at that table, no longer an outsider, no longer the commoner. I was Emma Chamberlain, wife, partner, leader, daughter-in-law, friend. I had a place now, not because I married into it, but because I earned it. After dinner, I stepped out onto the balcony with Ronald. The sky was painted with streaks of purple and gold. He slid his arm around my waist. What are you thinking about? He asked. I looked at the horizon. I'm thinking, life doesn't always give you what you ask for. But if you're brave enough to stay in the fight, sometimes it gives you something even better. He smiled. You always know what to say. I laughed softly. Only because I've lived through what not to say. He pulled me closer, and we stood there, breathing in the evening air, feeling the steady beat of our lives moving forward, together. And that's my story. Not a fairy tale. Not a tragedy. Just a real, messy, beautiful story about rising from the ashes of humiliation, finding strength in silence, and creating a home where I once felt like a stranger. I'm Emma Chamberlain. I was underestimated, humiliated, and nearly broken, but I got back up. And now I'm exactly where I belong.